Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you today about diet, nutrition, and your mental health. And more specifically, 5 signs that your nutritional habits might be impacting your brain, your mood, and your overall mental well-being. The brain, despite weighing only about 2% of your total body weight, consumes 20-25% of your daily calories. What you eat doesn't just feed your body, it shapes your neurochemistry, your hormone levels, your cognition, and yes, your emotional regulation. So let's break this down into 5 critical signs that your diet may be silently influencing your mental health. One of the most overlooked yet scientifically significant factors impacting mental health is blood sugar stability. Many people associate blood sugar solely with diabetes or weight gain, but the reality is that fluctuations in glucose levels have direct and measurable effects on brain function, emotional regulation, and cognitive performance. Let's break this down. When you consume food, especially carbohydrates, your body breaks it down into glucose, which enters your bloodstream. This glucose is then used by your cells, including neurons, for energy. However, not all carbohydrates behave the same way. Refined sugars, white bread, pastries, sodas, and ultra-processed foods tend to create a rapid spike in blood glucose levels, followed by a sharp crash. These crashes are not just physical, they're neurological events that impact the brain's chemistry and performance. During a glucose spike, insulin is released to shuttle that sugar into cells. When the spike is too high or frequent, insulin overcompensates, often pulling more glucose out of the bloodstream than necessary, leading to a sudden drop, what most people experience as a crash. This crash often comes with fatigue, difficulty concentrating, irritability, and in some cases, mild to severe anxiety symptoms. In neuroscience, we understand that glucose availability directly affects the function of key brain regions, particularly the prefrontal cortex, which governs executive function, attention, and emotional regulation. When blood glucose is unstable, the prefrontal cortex becomes less efficient, and the limbic system responsible for emotional processing can become more reactive. This shift results in increased emotional volatility, decreased impulse control, and impaired decision making. Moreover, low blood sugar or hypoglycemia activates the body's stress response system, including the release of cortisol and epinephrine, adrenaline. These hormones, while beneficial in a true fight-or-flight scenario, create a state of inner agitation, making the person feel anxious, restless, or mentally off. What's interesting is that many people experiencing daily irritability or mood dips attribute it to external stressors, unaware that their diet is creating a biological stress signal every few hours. In addition to stress hormones, these fluctuations influence neurotransmitter synthesis. Stable blood glucose helps maintain balanced levels of serotonin and dopamine, both crucial for mood and motivation. When glucose drops too quickly, the brain may struggle to produce enough of these neurotransmitters, leading to low mood, brain fog, and a decreased sense of pleasure or drive. This is particularly critical for people who are already predisposed to depression or anxiety, as even minor disruptions in glucose regulation can have amplified effects on their mental state. From a practical standpoint, the key to maintaining blood sugar stability is meal composition and timing. Meals rich in protein, healthy fats, and fiber slow the absorption of glucose into the bloodstream, resulting in a gentler, more sustained energy curve. For instance, starting your day with a high sugar breakfast cereal or sweetened coffee might give you a temporary lift, but it sets you up for a crash by mid-morning. In contrast, a breakfast with eggs, avocado, or a protein shake will provide steady energy and mental clarity for hours. Timing also plays a role. Skipping meals, especially breakfast, forces the body to tap into stored energy reserves, increasing cortisol production to maintain blood sugar levels. This physiological stress adds to cognitive fatigue and emotional reactivity. Eating balanced meals every 4 or 5 hours and avoiding large spikes in carbohydrates without sufficient protein or fiber helps support a more resilient nervous system. It's also worth mentioning the psychological effects of sugar dependency. Over time, the brain begins to associate sugary or high carb foods with temporary relief from low mood or mental fatigue. This leads to a feedback loop. The more unstable the blood sugar, the more frequent the cravings, and the more likely the individual is to reach for foods that perpetuate the cycle. Breaking this loop requires nutritional awareness and behavior change, but the rewards are substantial improved focus, reduced anxiety, better sleep, and emotional stability. In summary, blood sugar regulation isn't just about physical health. It's a foundation for mental resilience. By understanding the neuroscience behind glucose metabolism and its direct impact on brain chemistry, individuals can take meaningful steps to optimize their diet, enhance cognitive performance, and protect their emotional well-being. Cravings are often misunderstood. Most people think cravings are purely psychological, driven by habit, stress, or even boredom. But neuroscience tells a much deeper story. Cravings, particularly for highly palatable junk foods, those high in sugar, salt, and fat, are frequently the result of neurotransmitter imbalances. They are, in essence, a form of biological communication, a signal that the brain's chemistry is out of alignment and seeking correction. At the core of this is how the brain regulates dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins, the three major neurotransmitters involved in reward, motivation, mood, and satisfaction. When the body lacks the raw materials to create these neurotransmitters, or when their signaling pathways become depleted through chronic stress, poor sleep, or poor diet, the brain initiates a drive to restore balance. One of the fastest ways it knows how to do that is through food, especially ultra-processed food. Let's take dopamine, for example. Dopamine is critical for goal-directed behavior, motivation, and pleasure. When dopamine is low, people feel lethargic, disinterested, and emotionally flat. But foods high in sugar and saturated fat cause a rapid increase in dopamine release, particularly in the nucleus accumbens, the brain's central reward hub. This increase feels good temporarily, but because it's artificially elevated, the brain quickly downregulates dopamine sensitivity, leading to even lower baseline levels. This is why junk food cravings intensify over time. The brain is attempting to correct a dopaminergic deficit that the diet itself helped create. Now let's look at serotonin. This neurotransmitter plays a vital role in regulating mood, anxiety, and emotional stability. A deficiency in serotonin can lead to increased sadness, irritability, and impulsivity. Serotonin is synthesized from tryptophan, an amino acid that must come from food. However, tryptophan competes with other amino acids to cross the blood-brain barrier. Meals high in refined carbohydrates temporarily increase insulin, which helps clear competing amino acids from the bloodstream, giving tryptophan a better chance to enter the brain. This mechanism partially explains why people under emotional distress gravitate toward carb-heavy comfort foods they're unknowingly trying to self-medicate a serotonin deficiency. But this too becomes problematic. Over time, the repeated use of processed foods as a means of emotional regulation results in dysregulated serotonin pathways. The brain becomes less responsive to its own serotonin, and natural mood stability declines. This feedback loop can perpetuate anxiety, emotional eating, and eventually contribute to disorders such as binge eating or depression. Then there are endorphins, the body's natural opioids. Fat and sugar-rich foods stimulate endorphin release, providing a short-term sense of comfort or relief. This is one reason why people associate ice cream, candy, or fast food with feeling better after a hard day. But just like with external opioid use, over-reliance on food-induced endorphin release diminishes the body's own ability to create and regulate its endogenous opioid system. In other words, the more often one relies on these foods for comfort, the less capable the brain becomes at generating its own comfort chemicals. So, what's the way out of this cycle? The first step is understanding that cravings are not weakness. They are neurochemical feedback. They're your brain's way of saying, I'm lacking something essential. That could be a lack of amino acids like tyrosine or tryptophan, a vitamin, in deficiency such as B6 or magnesium, both crucial for neurotransmitter synthesis, or it could be chronic stress depleting your reward system's reserves. Correcting this starts with nutrient-dense food. Protein sources like eggs, chicken, fish, legumes, and dairy provide the building blocks for dopamine and serotonin. Complex carbohydrates such as oats, sweet potatoes, and fruits support serotonin in pathways without triggering glucose crashes. Foods rich in magnesium like dark leafy greens, pumpkin seeds, and nuts support GABA, the calming neurotransmitter, and reduce overstimulation in the brain. Hydration, sleep, and exposure to natural light also regulate neurotransmitter systems. For example, exposure to morning sunlight increases serotonin, and regular sleep supports dopamine receptor sensitivity. Exercise, particularly Zone 2 cardio and resistance training, naturally enhances both dopamine and endorphins without the crash that follows processed food consumption. In essence, the solution is not willpower, it's restoring balance to a dysregulated system. When the brain gets the nutrients and lifestyle conditions it needs, cravings diminish not because you're trying harder, but because your brain no longer needs to beg for help. Cravings aren't the problem, they're a symptom. The real issue is a misalignment between what the brain needs and what the body is giving it. And once that gap is closed through intentional dietary and lifestyle choices, the brain can once again find its natural state of clarity, motivation, and emotional steadiness. One of the most commonly reported but least understood symptoms of modern life is brain fog, that hazy, mentally sluggish state where focus is impaired, memory seems distant, and productivity grinds to a crawl. Most people assume it's caused by a lack of sleep, overwork, or stress. And while those certainly contribute, there's another major, often hidden factor at play: chronic inflammation from processed foods. To understand this connection, we need to look at what brain fog actually is. It isn't a clinical diagnosis, but a collection of cognitive symptoms: reduced mental clarity, slowed thinking, poor concentration, and forgetfulness. These aren't just subjective complaints. They're backed by real, measurable changes in brain function, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for focus, decision making, and working memory. One of the strongest contributors to these changes is neuroinflammation, inflammation in the brain and nervous system. This is not the same kind of swelling you'd see with a sprained ankle. Neuroinflammation is more subtle, but just as harmful over time. It's driven by immune signaling molecules called cytokines, which can be triggered by poor diet, especially a diet rich in processed, ultra-refined foods. Let's talk about those foods for a moment. Most ultra-processed products, chips, cookies, pastries, sugary cereals, fast food, are packed with refined carbohydrates, trans fats, artificial additives, and preservatives. These compounds initiate a low-grade inflammatory response in the body. That inflammation doesn't just stay in the gut or bloodstream. It crosses into the brain through a weakened blood-brain barrier. Normally, the blood-brain barrier acts like a selective filter, protecting the brain from toxins and unnecessary immune activation. But when exposed repeatedly to inflammatory foods, the integrity of this barrier weakens. This allows inflammatory molecules, toxins, and even pathogens to reach brain tissue more easily, where they activate microglia, the brain's immune cells. When microglia are chronically activated, they start to damage neurons and synapses, reducing the efficiency of communication between brain cells. That's when cognitive issues start to show up. You begin to lose sharpness, you forget why you walked into a room, you reread the same sentence multiple times, or your thoughts feel slower than usual. This isn't just mental fatigue, it's a biological slowdown caused by a pro-inflammatory internal environment. What's particularly concerning is that the brain has no pain receptors, so when inflammation occurs there, you don't feel it the way you would in your joints or muscles. Instead, you feel it as fog, emotional dullness, or even depressive symptoms. In fact, Elevated inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, CRP, and interleukin-6, IL-6, are consistently found in people suffering from depression, cognitive decline, and chronic fatigue. So, how do we fix this? The first step is to remove the sources of inflammation. That means dramatically reducing or eliminating ultra-processed foods from your diet. This doesn't mean cutting out all carbs or fats. It means prioritizing whole, minimally processed foods over manufactured ones. Foods high in refined seed oils, sugar, preservatives, and artificial sweeteners are the main culprits. The second step is to increase your intake of anti-inflammatory nutrients. Omega-3 fatty acids found in salmon, sardines, chia seeds, and walnuts are particularly effective. These fats are not only anti-inflammatory, they also support the structural integrity of brain cell membranes, enhancing communication between neurons. Additionally, polyphenols, plant compounds found in foods like blueberries, green tea, turmeric, and dark chocolate, have been shown to reduce neuroinflammation and support cognitive function. Another essential component is hydration. Mild dehydration can amplify inflammation and reduce brain volume, further contributing to mental fatigue. Drinking enough water, alongside reducing processed sodium intake, is a simple yet powerful way to support clear thinking. Also worth mentioning is the role of gut health. The gut is where much of the inflammatory process begins, and it communicates directly with the brain via the gut-brain axis. A damaged or imbalanced microbiome can send inflammatory signals to the brain, worsening fog and anxiety. Introducing prebiotic fibers like those in oats, apples, and flax seeds, and probiotics from yogurt, kefir, kimchi, etc., can help restore microbial balance and lower inflammation systemically. It's also crucial to manage sleep and stress, both of which can either calm or worsen inflammation. Poor sleep quality increases the production of inflammatory cytokines, while high cortisol from chronic stress weakens the blood-brain barrier and promotes neuroinflammation. In summary, if you're experiencing brain fog, don't just assume it's part of getting older or working too hard. It's often a direct result of dietary inflammation, which can be corrected by shifting toward whole foods, reducing processed ingredients, and supporting the brain's natural anti-inflammatory pathways. Mental clarity is not just a mind, it's a metabolic and neurological state you can build with every meal. The connection between the gut and the brain is not theoretical, it is biological, measurable, and critical to your emotional well-being. If you're experiencing chronic low mood, anxiety, irritability, or even depressive symptoms, it may not start in your thoughts or even in your brain. It may start in your gut. The gut and brain are connected by what's known as the gut-brain axis. This is a bidirectional communication network linking the central nervous system with the enteric nervous system. A complex web of neurons embedded in the gastrointestinal tract, often referred to as the second brain. This system produces and responds to many of the same neurotransmitters as the brain: serotonin, dopamine, GABA, acetylcholine, all of which are involved in regulating mood, cognition, and emotional resilience. What surprises many people is that over 90% of the body's serotonin is actually produced in the gut, not the brain. This serotonin is synthesized by specialized cells in the intestinal lining and regulated by the gut microbiome, the vast collection of bacteria, viruses, and fungi that live in the digestive tract. The state of this microbiome can dramatically influence how much serotonin is produced, how it's metabolized, and how well your brain receives it. When the gut is functioning optimally, when there is microbial diversity, proper nutrient absorption, and an intact gut lining, communication with the brain tends to be smooth and supportive. You feel emotionally balanced, alert, and calm. But when the gut becomes compromised due to poor diet, chronic stress, antibiotics, or lack of fiber, this gut-brain connection begins to suffer. One of the first signs of this breakdown is systemic inflammation. When the gut lining becomes permeable, a condition commonly referred to as leaky gut, toxins and undigested food particles can enter the bloodstream, triggering an immune response. This leads to the production of inflammatory cytokines that travel through the bloodstream and in some cases cross the blood-brain barrier, where they interfere with neurotransmitter function and increase the risk of mood disorders. This inflammation also affects the vagus nerve, the primary communication channel between the gut and the brain. When vagal tone is strong, signals from the gut help regulate mood, digestion, and heart rate variability. But chronic gut inflammation reduces vagal tone, weakening the body's ability to maintain calm and balance under stress. The standard Western diet high in sugar, refined carbs, artificial additives, and low in fiber is especially damaging to gut health. These foods feed harmful bacteria, reduce microbial diversity, and promote gut permeability. Over time, this environment can lead to a gut microbiome that not only fails to support mental health, but actively undermines it. On the other hand, when the gut is nourished with a diet rich in fermented foods, probiotic fibers, polyphenols, and omega-3 fatty acids, it begins to heal. Beneficial bacteria grow, the intestinal lining strengthens, and the production of mood, supportive neurotransmitters increases. Studies show that people who consume more fermented foods and fiber-rich plants report fewer symptoms of anxiety and depression, and this isn't placebo. It's physiological. Fermented foods like kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, and miso contain live cultures that support microbial diversity. Prebiotic fibers, found in foods like bananas, onions, garlic, leeks, oats, and legumes, feed those beneficial bacteria, allowing them to thrive and crowd out inflammatory strains. Polyphenols, plant compounds in berries, green tea, dark chocolate, and olive oil, act as antioxidants and also support microbiome health. It's also important to note the role of micronutrients like zinc, magnesium, and vitamin B12, which are absorbed in the gut and play direct roles in mood regulation. A compromised gut often means compromised nutrient absorption, even if you're eating well. That's why healing the gut isn't just about what you eat, it's also about how well your body can use what you eat. Sleep, exercise, and stress management also impact the gut-brain axis. Chronic sleep deprivation disrupts microbial diversity and increases cortisol, which harms the gut lining. Exercise, especially moderate intensity movement, improves gut motility and promotes a more favorable bacterial profile. And mindful practices like breathwork and meditation can activate the vagus nerve, restoring balance between the gut and brain. Ultimately, if you're struggling with low mood, you must consider your gut health as a root contributor. Emotional well-being is not just a mental phenomenon, it's a full body experience influenced heavily by the microbial and chemical signals coming from your digestive system. By nurturing the gut-brain connection, you don't just improve digestion, you unlock a powerful lever for better mood, greater mental clarity, and deeper emotional resilience. Sleep is not just a break from wakefulness, it is an active and biologically necessary process that restores brain chemistry, resets emotional balance, and regulates the neural systems responsible for mood and cognitive control. Poor sleep doesn't simply make you tired. It fundamentally compromises your mental resilience, weakening your ability to handle stress, regulate emotions, and maintain a positive mood. From a neurobiological standpoint, sleep governs several key systems in the brain, most notably the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and various neurotransmitter pathways. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive functions, decision making, impulse control, attention, and rational thinking. The amygdala, on the other hand, is responsible for processing emotion, particularly fear and threat perception. When sleep is adequate, the prefrontal cortex exerts top-down control over the amygdala, keeping emotional responses in check. However, even a single night of poor sleep can diminish prefrontal cortex activity and amplify amygdala reactivity, creating a brain state that is more emotionally volatile and stress-sensitive. In this state, the same challenges you face during the day, traffic, deadlines, difficult conversations, feel more overwhelming even when objectively they haven't changed. Sleep also plays a crucial role in regulating neurotransmitter systems, particularly serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. All three of these neurotransmitters are directly linked to emotional well-being. Serotonin is important for mood balance and calmness. Dopamine contributes to motivation, focus, and the experience of reward. GABA is the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter and acts like a brake system on stress circuits. These systems renew and rebalance during deep and REM sleep cycles. When sleep is disrupted, whether by insomnia, late night screen exposure, stimulants like caffeine, or inconsistent sleep timing, neurotransmitter signaling becomes erratic. This contributes to mood swings, irritability, low energy, brain fog, and even symptoms of anxiety or depression. Over time, this kind of sleep disturbance doesn't just lower your mood, it reconfigures your baseline emotional state, often without you realizing it. One of the most overlooked contributors to poor sleep is diet. What you eat when you eat it and how your body metabolizes nutrients all impact the quality and architecture of your sleep. For instance, diets high in refined sugar and saturated fat are associated with lighter, more fragmented sleep and less restorative deep sleep. These foods also increase inflammation and blood sugar variability, which can cause nocturnal awakenings and restless nights. Additionally, certain micronutrients, especially magnesium, vitamin D, B6, tryptophan, and zinc, are essential for the production of melatonin, the hormone that regulates your sleep-wake cycle. When your diet lacks these nutrients, or when absorption is impaired by poor gut health or inflammation, melatonin in production suffers, and your sleep becomes shallow or misaligned with your circadian rhythm. Let's not overlook the timing of food intake. Eating large meals late at night, especially high-carb or high-fat meals, can impair the body's natural drop in core temperature that's required for deep sleep onset. Ideally, your last meal should be consumed 2-3 hours before bed, with an emphasis on foods that are low in sugar, contain complex carbohydrates, and include magnesium, rich or tryptophan-containing ingredients such as oatmeal, nuts, dark leafy greens, turkey, or bananas. Another important dimension of sleep and mental resilience is circadian alignment. Your circadian clock, which governs sleep-wake cycles, is regulated largely by light exposure and meal timing. Disruptions to this rhythm, such as sleeping and waking at inconsistent hours or eating late into the night, can desynchronize hormonal release, body temperature, and neurotransmitter cycling, leading to chronic sleep disturbances and mood instability. Fortunately, the solution lies in reestablishing a stable rhythm through behavioral and nutritional changes. Morning sunlight exposure ideally within 30 minutes of waking, regular meal times, evening light reduction especially from screens, and a balanced anti-inflammatory diet all contribute to deeper, higher quality sleep. And better sleep builds emotional durability, improving your ability to face daily stressors without breaking down or feeling overwhelmed. In essence, sleep is not an afterthought to your mental health. It is the foundation. Without adequate, high-quality sleep, even the best diets, exercise routines, or mindfulness practices will have limited impact. But when sleep is prioritized and supported nutritionally and behaviorally, the brain restores its full capacity for clarity, emotional control, and mental resilience. We often think of food in simplistic terms: calories in, calories out, something to satisfy hunger or provide energy. But food is far more than fuel. It is information. Each bite you consume sends chemical messages that influence your brain function, neurotransmitter levels, gene expression, and ultimately your mental state. The brain is an energy-intensive organ. It consumes roughly 20% of your daily caloric intake, despite making up only about 2% of your body weight. But it's not just quantity that matters. Quality and timing of nutrients determine how well the brain performs, how clearly you think, how effectively you regulate emotions, and how resilient you are in the face of stress. Every macronutrient, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats plays a unique role in shaping the brain's chemistry. Carbohydrates, for example, help regulate the availability of tryptophan, the amino acid precursor to serotonin, the neurotransmitter most associated with mood stability, relaxation, and contentment. When carbohydrates are consumed in the right context, preferably complex carbs, paired with fiber and protein, they can support serotonin in production in a balanced way. But when consumed in excess, particularly from refined or sugary sources, they cause blood sugar spikes and crashes that disrupt dopamine and cortisol levels, leading to emotional dysregulation and mental fatigue. Proteins, on the other hand, provide the amino acids that serve as raw material for all neurotransmitters: tyrosine for dopamine, tryptophan for serotonin, glutamine for GABA. A diet lacking in high-quality protein means the brain lacks the building blocks it needs to maintain chemical balance. And even slight imbalances in these systems can lead to symptoms of depression, anxiety, lack of motivation, and poor concentration. Healthy fats, especially omega-3 fatty acids, are critical for brain structure and function. Every neuron in your brain is encased in a membrane made primarily of fat. The fluidity and permeability of these membranes determine how well neurons communicate with each other. Diets rich in omega-3s, like those found in wild-caught salmon, walnuts, flaxseed, and chia, have been shown to improve mood, enhance memory, and even reduce symptoms of clinical depression. In contrast, diets high in trans fats and refined vegetable oils have been linked to cognitive decline and increased inflammatory signaling in the brain. But food doesn't only influence the brain directly. It also affects the gut microbiome, which plays a central role in producing neurotransmitters, modulating inflammation, and maintaining the integrity of the gut-brain axis. In fact, much of the serotonin in the body is produced not in the brain but in the gut, where the microbiome regulates its synthesis and availability. A diet rich in fiber, polyphenols, and fermented foods supports microbial diversity, which helps maintain a stable mood and reduce anxiety. Micronutrients, too, are vital. Magnesium helps regulate GABA and calms the nervous system. Zinc and iron are needed for dopamine metabolism. B vitamins are essential for the methylation processes that maintain optimal neurotransmitter balance. A deficiency in even one of these nutrients can tilt the brain toward fatigue, brain fog, or emotional instability. This biochemical communication happens whether you're conscious of it or not. If you eat a breakfast high in sugar and low in protein, your brain doesn't just note that you're eating poorly, it begins to shift your neurochemical state accordingly. You may feel a temporary spike in alertness due to a surge in dopamine or insulin, but that's followed by a crash in both mood and mental clarity. The consequence isn't just tiredness, it's dysregulation, a condition where you can no longer trust your own emotional or cognitive baseline. Conversely, if you consume a well-balanced meal, say eggs with sautéed greens, avocado, and berries, your body receives the message: stabilize neurotransmitter output, reduce cortisol, and support synaptic plasticity. This isn't metaphorical. This is molecular neuroscience. Every food you ingest becomes part of a biochemical feedback loop that influences how your brain wires itself over time. Even timing matters. Eating late at night sends signals to your circadian system that can throw off sleep patterns and cortisol rhythms, which then affect mood the next day. Eating too infrequently or skipping meals can trigger spikes in adrenaline and cortisol, impairing focus and increasing reactivity. So food doesn't just affect what happens today. It sets the tone for your future cognitive and emotional states. In short, food is not neutral. It is a form of input, a form of instruction. It tells your brain whether to focus or fatigue, whether to stabilize or spiral, whether to feel motivated or depressed. When you begin to see food not just as fuel, but as neurochemical code, you start making choices that support long-term mental resilience, clarity, and emotional well-being.